I never imagined that the girl I grew up with in that old, crumbling orphanage, the girl I shared food, secrets, and dreams with, would one day be the daughter of one of the most powerful military generals in the country. And when I finally met him, everything I thought I knew about her, about our lives, and even about myself, completely shattered. Tell me honestly, if you discovered that the person you loved most had been living a lie, would you forgive them, or would you walk away forever? I still remember the smell of the damp walls in St. Mary's Orphanage, the faint stench of wet clothes, disinfectant, and old memories. I was 7 when I was brought there, after my parents died in a car accident that left me with a scar across my arm and a heart that never fully healed. Life in the orphanage wasn't kind. The nuns were strict, food was scarce, and affection was a rare luxury. But then there was Lena, a small, quiet girl with deep brown eyes and hair that looked almost golden in the sun. She had arrived a few months before me, and while most of the kids kept to themselves, Lena had this way of making you feel seen. The first day I met her, she offered me half of her bread roll and whispered, "You can have the bigger piece, I'm not that hungry." That tiny act of kindness meant everything. Over the years, Lena and I became inseparable. We shared the same bed when it got too cold, snuck into the kitchen together to steal cookies, and made up stories about who our real parents might be. She used to tell me she believed her father was alive somewhere, a soldier maybe. She'd say, her eyes gleaming, "He's just waiting for the right time to come get me." I never wanted to crush her dreams, so I'd just nod and smile, pretending to believe her. But deep down, I thought it was just another fantasy, something we told ourselves to make the pain bearable. As we grew older, life in the orphanage became more difficult. The funding decreased, the staff became crueler, and the world outside started to feel like a faraway dream. I was always protective of Lena. When older boys teased her, I'd step in. When she cried at night, I'd sit beside her and tell her stories about the world beyond those rusted iron gates. Someday, I told her once, we'll leave this place. You'll become an artist and I'll be, I don't know, maybe a teacher. We'll rent a small apartment and start fresh. She laughed and said, "You'll be my family, won't you?" And I said yes without hesitation. When we turned 16, Lena started receiving letters. The nuns said they were from a sponsor, someone who wanted to support her education. She never told me much about them, and at first I didn't think much of it. But slowly, things began to change. Lena started wearing nicer clothes. The nuns treated her differently, almost respectfully, while the rest of us were still scolded and beaten for the smallest mistakes. One day I saw her crying behind the chapel. When I asked her why, she said, "It's complicated. I can't explain." A year later, the orphanage arranged for her to leave early. They said her sponsor had found her a place in the city to study. I was happy for her, but I couldn't help feeling abandoned. The night before she left, she hugged me tightly and said, "Promise me you won't forget me, no matter what happens." I promised, and then she was gone. Life without Lena was empty. I stayed at the orphanage until I turned 18 and was finally allowed to leave. I got a small job at a hardware store and lived in a shared apartment with other boys. Years went by, and though I tried to move on, her memory never left me. I'd sometimes walk through the city and imagine seeing her face among the crowd. Then, one day, I actually did. It was raining, and I was rushing to catch a bus when I saw a woman standing under a bright red umbrella, talking to a driver beside a black car. She turned slightly, and my heart stopped. It was her. Lena, older, more elegant, dressed in a tailored coat, but still undeniably her. I froze, unable to move. She noticed me. Her eyes widened in shock before softening into a smile. "Daniel," she whispered. We went to a cafe nearby, and it felt like the years between us disappeared. She told me she'd been studying art and was now helping manage an exhibition. She looked radiant, successful, like everything she once dreamed of. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of sadness that she tried to hide. When I asked about her sponsor, she hesitated. "It's someone important," she said, "someone who didn't know about me for a long time." Over the next few weeks, we started meeting more often. The bond we had as kids came rushing back, only deeper this time. It wasn't just friendship anymore. We talked for hours, laughed, shared meals, and sometimes just sat in silence like we used to. One night, after walking her home, she suddenly said, "Daniel, there's something you should know, but not yet." I asked what she meant, but she just smiled sadly and kissed me on the cheek before going inside. Then came the day everything changed. She invited me to a private art exhibition she was organizing. I showed up in my best clothes, nervous but excited. When I arrived, the place was filled with wealthy guests, men in suits, women in gowns, and photographers flashing everywhere. I felt completely out of place. Lena spotted me and waved, but before I could reach her, an older man approached her. He was tall, broad, shouldered, wearing a decorated military uniform. The crowd seemed to part for him as he walked. He put his hand on Lena's shoulder and said, "You've done well, my daughter." Daughter? My heart dropped. She looked at me with guilt in her eyes. The man turned to me and asked, "And who might you be?" I could barely speak. Lena quickly stepped in, saying, "He's an old friend from school." The general nodded curtly, but I could see the suspicion in his gaze. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't focus. I just watched them together, realizing that her sponsor had been her father all along. After the event, I confronted her outside. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice shaking. Tears filled her eyes because I didn't know how, she said. "I didn't even know he was my father until a few years ago. He found me after hiring someone to investigate. He didn't want the public to know he had a daughter out of wedlock. It could have ruined his career. So he kept me hidden, paid for my education, gave me everything, except the truth." I didn't know what to say. I felt betrayed not because she was rich now, but because she had hidden such a huge part of her life from me. Still, I loved her. I told her that. She said she loved me too, but her father wouldn't approve. "He's very controlling," she said. "He's already planning my future, my marriage, everything." A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. It was the general. His voice was calm but cold. "Mr. Davis." He said, "I appreciate that you care for my daughter, but you must understand. She has responsibilities that go beyond sentimental attachments. I'll make sure you're compensated for staying away." I was stunned. "With all due respect, sir, your daughter isn't property." There was silence. Then he said, "Everyone has a price. Don't be foolish." That night, I met Lena secretly. I told her about the call. She was furious and said she'd confront him. But before she could, her father's men came to pick her up, claiming there was an emergency. After that night, she vanished again. So that's the situation I was in. The girl I'd grown up with, loved, and protected all my life was suddenly out of reach. This time not because of poverty, but because of power. I didn't know what to do. Would you have fought for her, or would you have walked away and let her live her new life? Seriously, I want you to pause for a moment and comment what you would have done in my place, because I was torn between love and logic, between my heart and my pride. Days turned into weeks. I couldn't stop thinking about her. One evening I got a letter, no return address. Inside was a small painting. It was of the orphanage courtyard with two small figures holding hands. On the back it said, "Don't forget me." That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to let her be caged by her father's ambitions. I found out through one of her art colleagues that she was being kept at her father's estate under constant watch. It took me 2 weeks to figure out a way in. When I finally saw her again, she looked pale and tired, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "He'll ruin you." I took her hands and said, "Then we'll both be ruined." But before we could escape, the general himself walked in. He wasn't surprised. "I warned you," he said, his voice like thunder. "You think this is a fairy tale. You think love can erase bloodlines. I stood my ground, maybe not, but it can make us human." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned to Lena. "You choose, him or me." She froze. Tears streamed down her face. Finally, she said, "I can't live without knowing who I really am. You hid me from the world, from myself. I love you, father, but I'm not your soldier." The general's face softened for a brief moment. Then he turned and walked out silently. The next morning, Lena was gone. The staff said she'd left early with her father to another country. I never saw her again. Months passed. I tried to move on, but her memory followed me everywhere. Then one day, a package arrived at my doorstep. Inside was another painting, this time of a sunset over the city skyline with two silhouettes in the distance. At the bottom, she had written, "Free at last." I later learned from the news that the general had retired unexpectedly and moved abroad. Maybe she finally convinced him to let her live her life. I like to think she did. Years later, I visited the old orphanage before it was torn down. The walls were cracked, the playground rusted, but when I closed my eyes, I could almost hear our laughter echoing again. Lena and I had dreamed of freedom, and in some way we both found it, just not together. Sometimes I wonder if she ever thinks of me, if she still paints those same sunsets we used to dream about. Maybe she does. Maybe she found peace. I know I did, in a strange way. Because even though life tore us apart, she taught me what love truly meant. Sacrifice, courage, and the will to fight for someone even when the world says you shouldn't. So, what do you think? Was I wrong for defying her father? Or was walking away the right thing to do in the end? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts on this one. If you were on my side, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this and share your final thoughts down below. I'll see you all in the next story.